The crystal palace of Athos had not sung in 40 days. Every building on the throne world was alive. The walls breathed. The towers hummed with deep, slow melodies that matched the mood of the people inside them. When the Valari were happy, their cities sang bright and warm. When they grieved, the cities went quiet. And for 40 days now, the greatest palace in the known galaxy had been silent, because the Empress was grieving, and the whole world grieved with her. Empress Navy sat in a dark room at the heart of the palace. She had not left this room in 6 days. Her advisors came and went. Her generals sent reports. Her people whispered prayers in the streets below. But Navy did not care about any of it. She only cared about the small figure lying inside the stasis cradle in front of her. Princess Lura, her only child, her only light. Lura was 12 years old by galactic standard counting. She was small for a Valari, with wide, curious eyes and skin that used to glow in soft shades of pink and gold when she laughed. She had loved to run through the palace gardens and chase the light moths that floated between the crystal flowers. She had loved to ask questions about the stars, about other species, about why the ocean on the far side of Athos was purple instead of blue. She had been full of life in every way a child could be. Now she lay still. Her skin was dim. The glow that every Valari carried from birth, the light of their neural network, the sign of their consciousness, was fading from her body like a candle burning down to nothing. The withering, that was what the physicians called it, a disease so rare that it appeared only once every few thousand years. It attacked the bioluminescent pathways that connected a Valari's mind to their body. Slowly, quietly, it dissolved those pathways one by one. The patient would lose their glow first, then their movement, then their thoughts. And finally, when the disease reached the core light, the bright center of every Valari's being, they would simply stop. Not die exactly. The Valari did not have a word for it. They would just become empty. Lura had 3 months left, maybe less. Navy reached into the cradle and touched her daughter's hand. It was cold. Valari's skin was always warm, always alive with light and heat. But Lura's hand felt like stone. Navy's own skin flickered with grief violet, a deep, bruised purple that pulsed through her entire body. She had been violet for 40 days straight. Some of her attendants worried that the grief itself would kill her. She had tried everything. She had sent envoys to every major civilization in the galaxy. The Tethani, those ancient monks who claimed to understand the secrets of life and death, had offered prayers and meditation rituals. The Gorvash, a warrior species who solved every problem with force, had offered to destroy any enemy causing the disease. There was no enemy. The Idhari, the galaxy's greatest mathematicians, had run their probability models and sent back a single message. The outcome is fixed. We are sorry. No one could help. No one would even try. Navy closed her eyes. Behind her, the door opened softly. Kesar, her chief physician, stepped inside. He was old, even by Valari standards. His glow had faded to a gentle silver over the centuries. He moved quietly and spoke even more quietly. "Empress," he said, "there is a small matter that requires your attention." "I have no attention to give," Navy said without opening her eyes. "A ship has been intercepted at the border. An alien vessel, very small, very damaged. It drifted into our space after a failed warp jump. Send them away." "They are human, Empress." She searched her memory. Humans. She had heard the name before somewhere, in some report she had barely read. A young species, barely a century into space travel. They lived on a small blue planet in an unremarkable part of the galaxy. They were soft, fragile, short-lived. Most galactic powers did not even bother to learn their language. "What do they want?" she asked. "Nothing, it seems. Their ship is broken. They are requesting permission to stay while they make repairs. There are only 9 of them. Then let them stay and let them leave. I do not care about humans, Kesar. Kesar bowed and left. Navy turned back to her daughter. She pressed her forehead against the edge of the cradle and whispered words in the old Valari tongue. Words that mothers had spoken to their children for 100,000 years. Words that meant stay, and please, and I am here. She had not responded in weeks. Far below the palace, in a docking bay that smelled of burnt metal and engine coolant, a battered ship called the Perseverance settled onto the landing platform with a groan. Its hull was scorched. One of its stabilizers was cracked. A panel on the left side was held in place with what appeared to be industrial tape and stubbornness. The rear hatch opened, and 9 humans stepped out into the crystal air of Athos. Lieutenant Do-hyun Park came out first. He was 31 years old, medium height, with short black hair and a calm face that hid a sharp mind. He was the team's field medic and unofficial leader whenever things went wrong, which was often. He looked around at the glowing walls, the translucent floors, the sky that shimmered with 3 distant suns, and he let out a slow breath. Well, he said, this is new. She was 29, shorter than Do-hyun, with dark eyes that never seemed to stop moving. She was a combat surgeon and experimental biologist, the kind of doctor who had steady hands during an earthquake, and a brain that never stopped asking questions. She had joined the Terran Frontier Corps because she wanted to see what was out there. What other kinds of life existed? What other bodies could teach her about the nature of living things? She stepped onto the platform and looked up at the palace towering above them. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Every surface caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. The air itself seemed to hum with a frequency just below hearing, something deep and sad, like a song that had forgotten its melody. Something is wrong here, Yuna said quietly. Do-hyun glanced at her. We just crashed into their space uninvited. Everything is wrong here. No, I mean with them, with this place. Can you feel it? Do-hyun paused. He could feel it. A heaviness. A silence that was too thick, too deliberate. Like the whole planet was holding its breath. Their Valari escort, a tall soldier with pale blue skin and a stiff expression, led them through the lower levels of the palace toward temporary quarters. The hallways were wide and beautiful and completely empty. Yuna watched everything. She noticed the dim patches on the walls, where the light seemed to pull away. She noticed the way their escort's skin flickered with color whenever they passed a certain sealed doorway on the east corridor. A brief flash of deep violet, quickly controlled. Grief. Yuna had read about Valari emotional displays in a xenobiology textbook once. Violet meant grief. She slowed her steps as they passed the sealed door. There was something behind it. She could feel a faint vibration, not sound, but something biological, weak and fading. What is behind that door? She asked. The escort stopped. His skin flashed violet again, deeper this time, almost black at the edges. He did not turn around. Nothing that concerns you, he said. He walked on. Yuna stood still for a moment, staring at the sealed door. Then she followed. But that night, lying on a bed made of something that felt like warm glass, Yuna stared at the ceiling and could not sleep. The pulse behind that door was still there. She could almost feel it through the walls, faint, fading, like a heartbeat running out of time. She pressed her hand against the wall. It was warm and alive, like everything on this world. But underneath the warmth, she felt the sadness. The whole palace was sad. The whole planet was sad. Something was dying here, and Yuna had never been very good at letting things die. 3 days passed. The humans stayed in their assigned quarters, ate the food that was brought to them, and waited for their ship to be repaired. The Valari were polite but distant. They treated the humans the way a person might treat a stray animal, with mild kindness and no real interest. Do-hyun did not mind. He was a patient man. He spent his time exploring the parts of the palace they were allowed to visit, talking to anyone who would listen, and learning what he could. Most of the Valari ignored him. A few answered his questions with short, careful words. But Do-hyun had a gift. He was warm without trying to be. He smiled easily. He listened when people spoke, and he remembered what they said. On the second day, he saw a Valari child sitting alone in a corridor, crying softly. The child's toy, a small crystal bird that was supposed to float and sing, had cracked and gone dark. Do-hyun knelt beside the child, examined the toy, and pulled a roll of engineering tape from his pocket. He wrapped the crack carefully, reconnected 2 tiny wires he found inside, and handed it back. The bird floated into the air and let out a weak but clear note. The child's skin lit up in bright gold, happiness, and she ran away laughing. A guard who had been watching from the end of the corridor tilted his head. His skin shifted through several colors that Do-hyun could not read. But the guard nodded at him before walking away, and that felt like something. On the third day, Do-hyun taught 4 Valari soldiers a human card game. They did not understand bluffing at first. The Valari could not hide their emotions, because their skin showed everything. But they found the concept fascinating. One of them, a young soldier named Riha, laughed so hard that her skin turned bright orange and she had to sit down. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks, she told him later. Not since the princess fell ill. The princess? Do-hyun asked carefully. Riha's skin went violet immediately. She shook her head and said nothing more. But Do-hyun filed the information away. Meanwhile, Yuna had been busy. She could not stop thinking about the sealed door. She spent her nights reading every piece of Valari biology she could find in the ship's limited database. The Valari were extraordinary. Their bodies were built around light, networks of bioluminescent pathways that carried consciousness, emotion, and thought through every cell. Their biology was part organic, part energy. It was beautiful and complex, and completely unlike anything humans had. On the 4th morning, she found Kesar. The old physician was sitting in a medical wing on the lower floors, reviewing data on a screen made of living crystal. He looked tired. His silver glow was dim. Yuna walked in without being invited and sat down across from him. "You are the physician who serves the Empress," she said. It was not a question. Kesar looked at her with ancient, careful eyes. "I am. Something is wrong with someone in this palace. Someone important. I can feel a biological signal coming from behind the sealed door in the east corridor. It is weak. It is getting weaker. I want to know what it is." Kesar was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why do you care?" Yuna blinked. "Because someone is sick. Many beings are sick across the galaxy. You do not know this person. You do not know our species. You are a guest here by accident. Why does it matter to you?" Yuna thought about this. She thought about all the reasons she could give. Scientific curiosity, professional duty, the oath she had taken as a doctor. But the truth was simpler than any of those things. "Because I can hear them fading," she said. "And I cannot sit in my room and do nothing while that happens." Something shifted in Kesar's expression. His skin, which had been a steady, dim silver, flickered with a color Yuna had not seen before, something between blue and gold, soft and uncertain. He studied her face for a long time, as if he was looking for something he did not expect to find. Then he told her about Lura. He told her everything, the withering, the slow destruction of the princess's neural pathways, the failed appeals to every civilization in the galaxy, the 3 months, now less, that remained. He told her about the Empress sitting alone in the dark, about a mother watching her child disappear one flicker at a time. Yuna listened without interrupting. When Kesar finished, She was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Show me the medical data." "I cannot. It is restricted. Only the Empress can grant access." "Then I need to speak to the Empress." "She will not see you. She has refused all visitors." "Then I will ask again." Yuna asked to see the Empress. She was refused. She asked the next day. Refused again. She asked the day after that. Refused a third time. The palace officials grew annoyed. One of them told her directly that a human, a primitive, short-lived alien from an unimportant world, had no place requesting an audience with the ruler of 47 star systems. Yuna nodded politely. Then on the fourth day, she walked past 3 guards, through 2 sealed doors that Do-hyun had quietly figured out how to open, and into the throne chamber of Empress Navy. The room was enormous. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into light. The walls were made of crystal that pulsed with slow, deep colors. Navy sat on a throne that looked like it had grown from the floor itself, a living structure of pale stone and soft light. She was tall, nearly 2 full heads taller than Yuna, and her skin was the darkest violet Yuna had ever seen. She looked like a woman made of bruises. Guards moved to stop Yuna. Navy raised a hand. She looked down at the small human, standing in the middle of her throne room with a datapad in one hand, and no fear on her face. "You are the human who has been asking to see me," Navy said. Her voice was low and heavy with exhaustion. "Yes. I have refused you 3 times, and yet here you are." "Yes. Why?" Yuna held up the datapad. "Your physician told me about your daughter, about the withering. I have studied the data that is publicly available, and I have compared it against human medical records from our own history. 60 years ago, humanity fought a war against itself, using biological weapons. One of those weapons created a disease that attacked our neural pathways in a way that looks very similar to what is happening to your daughter." The room went still. Even the walls seemed to stop breathing. "We beat it," Yuna said. "It took us years and it cost us millions of lives, but we beat it. The mechanism is not identical to the withering, but it is close. Close enough that I believe there is a chance, not a certainty, but a real chance that I can help." Navy stared at her. The violet in her skin deepened, and for a moment Yuna thought the Empress was going to have her removed. But then something else appeared in the color. A thin thread of pale gold, barely visible, running through the violet like a crack in a dark sky. Hope. Desperate. Terrified. Dangerous hope. "Every species in this galaxy has told me there is nothing to be done," Navy said quietly. "I know," Yuna said. "I am not every species. And humans do not accept hopeless very well." She placed the datapad on the floor in front of the throne. "Let me see her data. Let me try. If I fail, you lose nothing. If I succeed, you get your daughter back." The silence lasted for 10 heartbeats, 20, 30. Then Navy spoke a single word in Valari. The datapad on the floor lit up with access codes. That night, Yuna sat in her small room with every piece of medical data the Valari had on the withering, spread across 3 screens. Do-hyun brought her coffee, real coffee, from their emergency supplies, the last of it. He sat beside her and watched her read. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad. The disease is elegant. It is slow and thorough, and it attacks the one thing their biology cannot rebuild on its own. Their physicians have been trying to treat it with resonance therapy, using emotional and harmonic energy to slow the decay. It is not working. And your approach?" Yuna took a sip of coffee. Her eyes did not leave the screens. "We do not harmonize with diseases, Do-hyun. We fight them. I need a lab. I need Valari stem tissue samples, and I need about 6 miracles." Do-hyun leaned back and smiled. "So a Tuesday." Yuna almost laughed. Almost. But the data on the screen kept pulling her eyes back. Somewhere above them, behind that sealed door, A child's light was going out, and the clock was already running. Yuna began work the next morning. The Valari gave her a small laboratory on the lower level of the medical wing, not out of generosity, but because they did not believe she would need anything larger. She was, after all, a human. What could she possibly do that their own physicians had not already tried? Yuna did not care what they believed. She had work to do. The first problem was the difference between human biology and Valari biology. Humans were made of blood, bone, and muscle. The Valari were made of light. Their cells carried bioluminescent networks that functioned like a second nervous system, one that ran on energy rather than electrical signals. Human medicine was designed to fight diseases made of proteins and chemicals. The withering was something else entirely. It was a decay of light itself. She mapped the withering's progression through Lura's neural pathways, comparing it against the data she had from the gene wars. The human disease, called the black thread, had attacked neural connections by producing a protein that dissolved the links between brain cells. The withering did something similar, but instead of proteins, it used a kind of anti-resonance. It created a frequency that canceled out the light in Valari cells, one pathway at a time. Different mechanism, same result, destruction from the inside. On the third day, Yuna began adapting a human gene editing tool called CRISPR-9. It was the 7th generation of a technology that humanity had been developing for over a century, a way to cut into the code of living cells and rewrite them. She needed to modify it so it could work on Valari cells, which did not have DNA in the way humans understood it. Valari genetic information was stored in light patterns, complex arrangements of bioluminescent frequencies that encoded everything from eye color to personality. It was like trying to use a hammer on a piece of music. The tools were wrong for the material. Yuna tried anyway. She failed on the first attempt, and the second, and the 5th, and the 12th. She adjusted variables, changed approaches, started over from nothing, tried again. Do-hyun brought her food that she forgot to eat. He brought her water that she drank without noticing. On the second night, he found her asleep at her workstation with her face pressed against a screen. And he picked her up and carried her to her bed. She woke up 4 hours later and went straight back to the lab. The Valari Scientific Council watched all of this with growing unease. They were led by Elder Thale, a very old and very proud Valari, whose skin had faded to a pale gray that rarely showed any color at all. Thale had spent 3 centuries studying Valari medicine. He had tried to cure the withering himself and failed. The idea that a young, fragile alien from a primitive species could succeed where he had not was something he could not accept. Her methods are barbaric, Thale told the council during a private meeting. She wants to cut into our biology with tools designed for meat and bone. She wants to inject chemicals into the princess's neural pathways. She speaks of disease as if it were an enemy to be defeated in combat. This is not how Valari medicine works. Our way is harmony, resonance, balance. Our way has not worked, Kesar said quietly from the corner of the room. Thale's skin flashed a brief, angry red. Her way will kill the princess faster. The princess is already dying, Thale. The room went silent. Kesar's words hung in the air like something heavy and sharp. No one wanted to say it, but everyone knew it was true. Lura was dying, and nothing the Valari had tried had made any difference. Thale did not argue further, but he did not help either. On the 8th day, Yuna requested a set of stem tissue samples from Lura's neural core. These were the most sensitive samples possible, living fragments of the princess's fading light. She needed them to test her latest version of the modified CRISPR-9 tool. Kesar approved the request and scheduled the extraction. The samples never arrived. Yuna waited for 6 hours. Then she checked with the medical wing. The extraction had been completed, but the samples had been reclassified as restricted and locked in a storage unit that required council approval to open. Yuna checked the authorization records. The reclassification had been made by Elder Thale. She told Do-hyun. His jaw tightened, a small movement, but Yuna knew him well enough to recognize real anger behind his calm face. He did not shout. Instead, he walked through the palace until he found Thale standing alone on a balcony overlooking the crystal gardens below. Do-hyun stood beside the old Valari and said nothing for a while. Thale ignored him. His gray skin showed nothing. "I know what you did," Do-hyun said finally. "The samples. I did what was necessary to protect the princess from reckless experimentation. You did what was necessary to protect your pride." Thale turned to look at him. His eyes were cold and ancient. "You understand nothing about our people." "Maybe not," Do-hyun said, "but I understand something about fear. You are afraid. You are afraid that a human might do what you could not, and that fear is going to cost a child her life." Thale said nothing. "If it were your child," Do-hyun said very quietly, "would you stop anyone from trying?" The silence between them lasted a long time. The crystal gardens below shifted colors in the light of the three suns. Somewhere inside the palace, an empress was sitting beside her dying daughter, waiting for something, anything, to change. Thale released the samples the next morning. He did not speak to Do-hyun again for several days. Yuna worked. She failed. She adjusted. She failed again. She was running out of time, and she knew it. But she did not stop. Do-hyun told her once that stubbornness was not a strategy. She told him that it was the only one she had. On the 14th day, Empress Navy came to the laboratory. She had not visited before. She stood in the doorway and looked at the chaos inside. Screens covered in data, broken equipment stacked in corners, empty coffee packets from the Perseverance scattered across every surface. And in the middle of it all, a small human woman with dark circles under her eyes and steady hands working on something so delicate it was almost invisible. Navy watched for a long time. Then she stepped inside. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Yuna did not look up from her work. "Kesar asked me the same thing." "And what did you tell him?" "That I could feel someone fading, and I could not sit still." "That is not a reason. You do not know my daughter. You do not know my people. You owe us nothing. Your species has received nothing from the Valari. No technology, no alliance, no help. We have ignored you for your entire existence. Why would you destroy yourself trying to save one of us?" She put down her tools and looked up at the Empress. Navy was glowing with deep violet grief. But there was something else in her light now. Confusion. Genuine confusion. The Empress of 47 star systems could not understand why this small, short-lived creature was doing what she was doing. "Because she is someone's kid," Yuna said. "That is enough." Navy stared at her. A color moved through her skin that Yuna had not seen before. Something soft, something warm, something that did not have a name in any language Yuna knew. The Empress left without another word. That night, Yuna made a breakthrough. She found a way to bond a human antiviral protein with a Valari neural light enzyme, creating a hybrid compound that could enter Valari cells and reinforce the bioluminescent pathways against the withering's anti-resonance. She tested it on one of Lura's tissue samples. It did not stop, but it slowed. Yuna sat back in her chair and stared at the result. Her hands were shaking. It was not a cure, not yet, but it was the first time in the entire history of the withering that anything had slowed its progression at all. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of relief. Then she went back to work. But the galaxy was not done testing her. The next morning, Kesser came to the lab with a face that had gone almost completely dark. His silver glow was barely visible. He spoke in a voice that shook. The princess's condition has worsened. The withering has accelerated. We do not know why. The estimates were 3 months. He paused. It is now weeks, perhaps less. Yuna felt the floor drop out from under her. Weeks. She had a compound that slowed the disease, but she was nowhere close to stopping it. She needed more miracles. She looked through the walls, toward the room where she knew Lura lay dying, where she knew Navy sat holding her daughter's cold hand. She thought about a mother's grief. She thought about a child's fading light. She thought about how unfair the universe was, and how little that mattered, because fairness had never saved anyone. Not today, Yuna whispered. You do not get her today. Time became the enemy now. Every hour that passed, Lura's light faded a little more. Kesar gave Yuna updates each morning, and each morning the numbers were worse. The withering was not just continuing, it was accelerating, as if the disease could feel someone fighting it, and had decided to move faster. Yuna stopped sleeping in her quarters. She set up a cot in the corner of the lab, and slept in short bursts of 2 or 3 hours, whenever her body forced her to stop. Do-hyun managed everything else, running supply checks between the Perseverance and the lab, adapting human tools to work with Valari power systems, keeping the rest of the crew informed, and making sure Yuna ate at least 1 real meal a day. You cannot save her if you kill yourself first, he told her on the 4th day of the crisis. I know, she said, and did not stop working. The compound she had created, the hybrid of human antiviral proteins and Valari neural light enzymes, it slowed the withering, but slowing was not stopping, and stopping was not curing. Every time Yuna tested a stronger version of the compound, the withering adapted. It shifted its anti-resonance frequency just enough to slip past the defense. It was like trying to build a wall against water. The disease always found a way through. On the 6th day, Yuna hit a wall of her own. She had tested 41 versions of the compound. All of them slowed the withering. None of them stopped it. She sat at her workstation staring at the results, and for the first time since she had started, she felt the weight of it all pressing down on her chest like a stone. Kesar found her like that. He had been helping her more and more over the past week, setting aside his own pride and the traditions of Valari medicine to assist this strange human woman who fought disease like a soldier fought an enemy. He stood in the doorway and watched her stare at the screen. You have done more than any being in the history of the withering, he said gently. You have slowed it. That alone is a miracle. Slowing it is not enough. Slowing it just means she dies slower. Kesar was quiet. Then he sat down beside her and said something that changed everything. There is something I have not told you. Something our physicians have always known but never spoken about openly, because it does not fit into our models. The withering does not only attack the cells, it attacks the will of the cells. Yuna looked at him. What do you mean? Valari biology is psychoreactive. Our emotions shape our bodies. When we are happy, our cells regenerate faster. When we grieve, they slow down. When we feel loved, our light burns brighter. The withering exploits this. It does not just dissolve neural pathways, it creates a silence inside the patient. The cells stop wanting to fight because there is no emotional signal telling them to live. Yuna's mind raced. She thought about the stasis cradle. Lura had been in stasis for weeks, sealed away from all contact, all sensation, all emotion. The stasis was keeping her body alive, but it was also keeping her completely isolated. No sound, no touch, no love reaching her. She is alone in there, Yuna said slowly. Her cells are giving up because she has no reason to fight. Yes. Then we need to give her a reason. The idea that formed in Yuna's mind was dangerous. It went against everything the Valari had done to protect Lura. The stasis cradle was keeping the princess stable, Removing her from it would expose her to the full force of the withering, without the buffer that had been buying them time. Without stasis, Lura could deteriorate in hours. But with stasis, the compound would never be enough. The disease would keep finding ways around the chemical defense because the cells themselves had stopped fighting. Yuna needed the cells to fight back. She needed Lura's biology to wake up. She needed a mother's love to do what science alone could not. Yuna brought the idea to Navy. She explained it as simply as she could. Remove Lura from stasis. Let Navy sit beside her, speak to her, touch her, flood her with the emotional resonance that Valari biology needed to heal. While that was happening, Yuna would inject the compound directly into Lura's neural light core, the center of her being, the last and brightest point of her fading consciousness. It was the most dangerous thing Yuna had ever proposed. If the compound failed, Lura would die. If the emotional resonance was not strong enough, Lura would die. If the timing was wrong by even a few minutes, Lura would die. Her skin cycled through violet, through gray, through colors that had no name. When Yuna finished, the Empress was silent for a long time. "You are asking me to hold my daughter while she might die in my arms," Navy said. "Yes," Yuna said. "I am also asking you to be the reason she does not." The Valari Scientific Council opposed the plan. Thale called it madness. 3 other elders agreed. They argued that removing stasis was an irreversible step. Once it was done, there was no going back. If the procedure failed, Lura would be gone within hours. Navy listened to their arguments. She listened to their fears and their logic and their centuries of experience. Then she stood and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of an empire. "I have sat beside my daughter for 53 days and watched her disappear. Your experience has given me nothing but a slower death to watch. This human has given me something none of you could. She has given me a chance. I am taking it." The council fell silent. No one argued with an empress who had already made her decision. They prepared the room. Kessar oversaw the medical setup. Monitors for Lura's core light levels, backup systems in case of cardiac failure, emergency stasis pods that could be activated in seconds if things went wrong. Yuna prepared 3 doses of the compound, each one slightly different, each one designed to target a different layer of the neural light core. She would inject them in sequence, 30 seconds apart, while Navy provided the emotional resonance. Do-hyun stood at the door. He had no medical role in this procedure, but he was not going to be anywhere else. They brought Lura out of stasis at exactly midday. The effect was immediate and terrible. Without the cradle's protection, Lura's light, already dim, began to fade visibly. Her skin, which had been a pale ghost glow, started to darken at the edges. The monitors showed her core light dropping. Navy took her daughter's hand. She sat beside her on the bed and leaned close, pressing her forehead against Lura's. And then she began to glow. It was not the grief violet that had covered her for weeks. This was something else entirely. A deep, warm gold, bright and fierce and overwhelming. Mother light. The Valari produced it only for their children, and only in moments of absolute, unconditional love. It poured from Navy's skin like sunlight through water, washing over Lura's small, fading body. Yuna watched the monitors. Lura's decline slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. The mother light was doing something. The cells were responding, just barely, to the emotional signal. It was time. Yuna injected the first dose. The compound entered Lura's neural light core and began reinforcing the damaged pathways. For a moment, the decline paused. Then it resumed. The withering pushed back. Yuna injected the second dose. This one was stronger, targeted at the deeper pathways where the disease had taken root. The monitors flickered again. The core light stabilized, held steady for 3 seconds, 4, 5, then began dropping again. Yuna's hands were steady. Her heart was not. She looked at Navy, whose golden light was blazing so brightly that the whole room was bathed in warmth. She looked at Laura, whose small face was still and pale. She injected the third and final dose. Nothing happened. 1 second, 2, 5, 10. The monitors showed no change. The core light continued to fade. Yuna felt the ground shifting under her feet. She had given everything she had. Every idea, every tool, every version of the compound, every sleepless night. And it was not enough. 11 seconds. The monitors beeped. A single, sharp note. Yuna looked up. Laura's core light had stopped falling. It held, trembling, flickering, but holding. Then, so slowly that Yuna almost missed it, the number began to climb. Not much, a fraction, but upward. Yuna looked at Laura's hand. The fingertips, which had been dark and still, were glowing. A faint, soft violet, the color of consciousness returning. Laura opened her eyes. They were dim and confused, and not fully focused. But they were open. She looked around the room as if she did not understand where she was. Then she saw her mother's face, golden and tear-streaked and blazing with light, and something shifted in her expression. She whispered a single word. In Valari, it did not translate exactly into any human language. The closest meaning was somewhere between warm and safe and you are here. Navy made a sound that was not a word in any language, just a raw, broken sound of relief and love and grief, all compressed into a single breath. She pulled her daughter close and held her, and her light wrapped around them both like a blanket made of stars. Yuna stepped back. Her legs were shaking. Do-hyun was beside her. She had not heard him move, and he put a hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it, just slightly, just enough. The withering was not cured. The disease was still there, lurking in the deeper pathways. Laura would need ongoing treatment, regular doses of the compound, careful monitoring. But the progression had stopped. The core light was stable. The cells were fighting back. Laura was alive. She was awake. She was holding her mother's hand. And in the doorway of the room, Elder Thale stood watching. His gray skin, which had not shown color in decades, flickered once, a brief, barely visible flash of gold, before he turned and walked away in silence. 3 weeks passed, and the palace of Aethys began to sing again. It started quietly, a low hum in the walls, a gentle vibration in the floors, a warmth in the air that had been missing for so long that most people had forgotten it was supposed to be there. The crystal towers caught the light of the 3 suns and scattered it in colors that no one had seen in months. The gardens bloomed. The light moths returned. And slowly, carefully, the people of Aethys began to believe that the worst was over. Laura was recovering. She was still weak. She could not walk more than a few steps without resting, and her glow was a fraction of what it had been before the withering. But she was awake. She asked questions again. About the compound that had saved her. About the alien woman who had made it. About the strange species called humans that no one had ever paid attention to before. Yuna visited her every day to check her vitals and administer the compound. Each time she entered the room, Laura's skin would brighten just a little, a soft flicker of pink that the Valari physicians said was a sign of trust. Yuna pretended not to notice, because noticing made her feel things that were dangerously close to attachment, and she knew she would be leaving soon. The Perseverance was repaired. The warp drive had been rebuilt using a mix of human engineering and Valari crystal technology, a combination that should not have worked, but did, because Do-hyun had spent 3 weeks building relationships with every Valari technician in the docking bay, and they had decided they liked him enough to help. It was time to go. But first, there was the matter of the throne room. Empress Navy had sent a formal summons, not a request, but a command, for Yuna and Dahyun to appear before the full imperial court. When Dahyun read the message, he looked at Yuna with raised eyebrows. Full court? That means every ambassador, every elder, every military commander in 47 star systems. I know. Should we be worried? I do not think so. You do not sound sure. I am never sure about anything. That has not stopped me yet. They walked into the throne chamber together. The room was full. Hundreds of Volari stood in tiered rows along the crystal walls. Dignitaries in shimmering robes, soldiers in light armor, elders with skin glowing in every shade of silver and gold. The air hummed with a low, resonant frequency that Yuna felt in her bones. It was not grief. It was something else. Something bigger. She was transformed. The grief violet that had covered her for weeks was gone, replaced by a deep, steady gold that radiated outward like heat from a star. She wore a crown of living crystal that shifted color with her mood, and right now it burned with a light so bright that Yuna had to squint. Beside the throne, in a smaller chair that had been placed there specially, sat Lura. She was pale and thin, and her glow was still faint. But she was sitting upright. She was watching. And when Yuna and Dohun entered the room, her skin flickered with that soft pink again. Navy stood. The court fell silent. 312 cycles ago, the Empress began, her voice carrying through the chamber like a bell. The Volari Empire sent a message to every spacefaring civilization in this galaxy. We asked for help. We told them our air was dying. We offered everything we had. Technology, territory, resources, alliance. We begged. The silence in the room was complete. 209 species received our message. 43 responded. None of them could help. Most of them did not try. Some offered sympathy. Some offered prayers. Some offered nothing at all. Her gaze swept across the court. And then a broken ship carrying 9 humans drifted into our space by accident. They had no mission here. They had no orders. They owed us nothing. We had given their species nothing in their entire history. Not a word, not a glance, not a single moment of recognition. Navy looked directly at Yuna. And one of them saved my daughter. The chamber erupted in light. Every Volari in the room shifted color simultaneously. A wave of gold and white that rolled through the crowd like sunrise. Yuna stood very still, because she did not know what else to do. Dohyun stood beside her with his hands clasped behind his back, and a carefully neutral expression that Yuna knew was hiding a significant amount of emotion. Navy descended from the throne. She walked across the chamber floor until she stood directly in front of Yuna. Up close, the Empress was enormous. Her presence filled the space around her like gravity. But her eyes were warm, and her light was steady. And when she spoke again, her voice was soft enough that only Yuna and Dohyun could hear. I want to give you everything, Navy said. Name it. Territory, ships, technology that your species will not develop for another 1,000 years. Wealth beyond anything your world has seen. Ask, and it is yours. Yuna blinked. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at Dohyun. Dohyun looked back at her with an expression that said, please do not accidentally offend the Empress of 47 star systems. Your Majesty, Yuna said carefully, I did not do this for a reward. I did it because your daughter was sick, and I am a doctor. That is what doctors do. Yuna thought about it. She thought about her ship, her crew, the long journey home, the reports she would have to file, the debriefings she would have to sit through. She thought about Lura's face when she opened her eyes. She thought about Kesar's quiet silver glow and Riha's bright orange laugh, and the way the palace had started singing again. I would like the Volari to remember us, she said, not as primitive, not as young, just as people who tried. Navy stared at her. Then she turned to Dohyun. And you? What does the lieutenant want? Do-hun considered this for about 2 seconds. Honestly, some star charts would be nice. And maybe a trade agreement. Our coffee supply is running low, and I have a feeling where crystal fruit would sell very well on Earth. A sound moved through the court that Yuna had never heard before, a rippling musical vibration that shook the crystal walls. It took her a moment to realize what it was. The Valari were laughing. Navy turned back to the court. She raised her hand, and the laughter faded into warm silence. "Dr. Yuna Bake," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "By the authority of the Valari throne, I name you Lura Kayen, Lightbringer of the Air. This is the highest honor the Valari can bestow upon one who is not of our blood. In our history, it has never been given to an outsider. It is given now." Yuna felt heat wash over her, and realized that the Valari were directing their light at her, hundreds of them, all at once, pouring warmth and gratitude and something close to reverence into the air around her. She could not glow back. Humans could not do that. But she stood straight and met the Empress's eyes and nodded, and that was enough. "Lieutenant Do-hyun Park," Navy continued, "I name you Vel Torin, warmth among strangers, for the kindness you showed our people when you had no reason to, for the toy you fixed, the game you taught, and the question you asked an old man on a balcony that changed the course of this story." Do-hyun bowed. His face was calm, but Yuna noticed that his hands, clasped behind his back, were trembling slightly. After the ceremony, as the court dispersed and the chamber hummed with conversation and light, Navy found Yuna one more time. They stood together near a window that overlooked the crystal gardens, where light moths drifted between flowers that had only just begun to bloom again. "Every empire in this galaxy asked what the Valari could give them," Navy said quietly. "You are the first who asked what you could give us. I do not think you understand how rare that is." "It should not be rare," Yuna said. "No, it should not," Navy agreed. They stood in silence for a moment. Then a small voice came from behind them. "Yuna." They turned. Lura was standing there, supported by Kesar, who held her arm with the gentleness of someone handling something infinitely precious. She was pale, and her steps were unsteady, and her glow was still barely a whisper. But she was standing, she was walking, she was alive. She let go of Kesar's arm and took 3 careful steps toward Yuna. Then, she reached up and placed her small, luminous hand against Yuna's chest and her heart. Yuna looked down. Her skin did not glow. Humans could not do that. They had no bioluminescent networks, no neural light, no visible sign of what they carried inside. But Lura smiled, a real smile, the first full smile anyone had seen from her since before the withering, and said in careful, practiced human words, "It glows on the inside." Yuna's vision blurred. She blinked hard, twice, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was bigger than what this child had just given her. The Perseverance left Athos the next morning, 9 humans aboard a battered ship, heading back toward a small blue planet in an unremarkable part of the galaxy. Behind them, the crystal world caught the light of 3 suns and burned like a jewel. Within a year, the Terran-Valari Compact was signed, the first equal alliance between a galactic elder race and humanity. Trade routes opened. Knowledge flowed in both directions. Valari physicians began studying human medicine. Human scientists began learning about bioluminescent biology. For the first time, the galaxy looked at the young species from Earth and saw something they had not noticed before. Other civilizations asked the Valari why. Why ally with humans? They were young. They were fragile. They lived barely a century. They had no great fleets, no ancient wisdom, no weapons that could shake the stars. What did they have that was worth an empire's friendship? Navy answered the same way every time. When my daughter was dying, I sent a message to the galaxy. I asked every civilization for help. 209 species heard me. Most of them turned away. The ones who responded told me it was hopeless. They told me to prepare for loss. They told me there was nothing to be done. She would pause, and her skin would glow with that deep, steady gold that she had carried ever since the day her daughter opened her eyes. And then 9 humans arrived by accident, in a broken ship, with no orders and no obligation. And one of them looked at my daughter and said, "Let me try." She would let that settle, and then she would add, in a voice that carried the weight of an empress and the gratitude of a mother, "The galaxy measures civilizations by the size of their fleets, the reach of their borders, the age of their stars." But I learned something that year. Sometimes the measure of a species is simply this: what they do when someone else's child is dying and no one expects them to care. The Palace of Athos sang for a long time after that. And somewhere in the melody, if you listened carefully, there was a new note. Small, warm, and stubbornly bright. A human note. It did not match the harmony perfectly, but it made the song better. And no one who heard it ever forgot it.